we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you. Thank you. Well, this is really quite thrilling that for the second week in a row we have a very, very full room, and that's just really a tribute to the community and your interest in preserving our heritage of protecting and loving and preserving our wildlife. Last week we talked about turtles. This week we're going to be talking about our birds. I'm Madeline Kay. Sorry, I'm on town council and chair of the environmental committee, so that's why I'm here today. The fact that so many of you are here illustrates the respect that you've got for our wildlife, but also how much we all cherish Aaron, who is really at the core of just about everything that we do with our shorebirds. Aaron's, for those of you who don't know, Aaron's been a biologist with the town now for about 20 years. He's become something of a legend for his birding activities up and down the East Coast. We couldn't be luckier than to have him. Aaron's got his master's degree in wildlife biology, and his primary research interest is in ornithology, with a special focus on avian ecology and management. Now, this I need to consult my notes. In addition to the avian ecology and management, he focuses in on songbird migration ecology and secretive marsh bird ecology. Like, okay, how secretive. He currently manages one of the most ambitious bird banding stations in the Southeast, and he's got a special focus on fall migration, wintering marsh sparrows, painted bunting, and Wilson's plover. And about a month ago, Aaron gave a presentation kind of in advance of this one to the environmental committee, and his storehouse of knowledge that he just keeps up in his brain to pull up at any given moment is really quite amazing. Again, we are very lucky to have him. Today's program is being co-sponsored by our friends, by the town as part of our Kiawah Conversations, newly formed educational program, and also with Kika's Our World program. The Our World lecture series has been going on now for close to 20 years and just keeps growing and has tremendous community support and tremendous community leadership. And with that, I will turn it over to my co-host, Frances Boyd, who is one of the co-chairs of the Our World Committee.
Thanks, Madeline. I would like to welcome Aaron, too. He used to come to my house at least once a year to trap my little painted buntings that would come to my bird feeder, and with this amazing gentleness, would put a little tag on their feet. So if you've never seen that being done, you might want to think about it. So thank you for being here, Aaron. And also, and Aaron is also very knowledgeable, but he's also a really nice guy. I just need to put that in. And I would like to draw your attention to the displays on the side of the wall. We have Pamela Cohen, who has a few of her pictures up, and her website going. It's to see all of her work. It is worth going to her website, and she has cards. She's a professional photographer, and she shows her works at the Wells Gallery right up in the sanctuary. And she has a website, so you might want to check that out. And then particularly appropriate for this program is Cindy McKinley, and she is the town's new chair for about a year of the Shorebird Steward program. And I am proudly a Shorebird Steward, and I keep working constantly to try to tell one of those little feathery things from the other, but I'm working on it. And she's here so that you can find out about her program, and maybe you would like to become a shorebird steward. And Aaron will go into other ways that you can become, since you're interested in birds anyway, you might want to be a little more proactive, and this program will tell you how you can do that. So Aaron, thanks again.
All right, thanks. Thanks for that intro. After all those nice words, I'm not sure I can live up to that. So I might just be done right now and just leave. So, so when I was putting this presentation together, I was trying to think of a good way to present all this information into one package. There's a lot, and and I'm going to try to get through it quickly in some places. So if I start to, give me some of this if I'm going too slow. So I don't want to keep you guys here all night. So kind of the way I set this presentation up is I kind of want to take you guys through kind of a journey through the seasons here on Kiawah. This is a little exaggerated. But I wanted just to make the point that there are seasons somewhere, and here's our seasons here. So pretty much you can look at the same thing, and it's like that all year. I also want to kind of look through the habitats as well that we have here. So kind of focus and pull some different bird species and some of the research that we do from the different habitats. We got our beach, we've got our kind of scrub shrub, dunes area there, we got our salt marsh, and then our maritime forest as well. Wrong one. All right, so here I want to poll the audience. How many people think that we have more than 250 species, or 250 or less on this island? Or less. So, okay. How about 300? 350? Okay. So our official total as of now, I guess, is 324 different species that have been recorded on Kiawah Island. So to put that into perspective a little bit, there's been about 450 bird species recorded in the state of South Carolina. So almost 75% of those we have seen and recorded right here on this island. And to even broaden that out a little bit, there's about 990 species in North America. So a third of those we've recorded just on this island that's 15 square miles. So that's pretty incredible that this island is attractive to that many different species of birds. We'll kind of broaden out a little bit, and I just kind of threw this slide up here just to kind of break out kind of the groups of birds, but of those species, 39 of those are waterfowl, ducks and geese and swans. 37 of those are shorebirds, your plovers and your sandpipers. 33 species of seabirds. I include terns and gulls and loons into that category. We've got 21 species of wading birds, your herons and egrets, 21 species of raptors, your falcons and hawks, owls, and 170 plus species of, I'm just going to call them, say, songbirds. I had to do some creative lumping, things like kingfisher isn't really a songbird, but I dumped it into that category just for the sake of this talk. So why is Kiawah important? Well, I heard that location. We're situated along the Atlantic Flyway. That is one of the 4 major flyways during bird migration. Millions and millions of birds funnel through the East Coast every year, from north to south, and then again from south to north during migration time. And we sit right along that pathway, so we have a lot of birds that move through here. The other important thing is we have habitat. We have a relatively small island, but we have really good and diverse habitat within that. So when you have a lot of different types of habitat, that's why you get all that diversity. It's because each one of those species is kind of unique to those different habitats, and you can get a lot of different species in a small area. Because of the habitat, it provides the 3 basic needs for anything to survive. Basically, you got food, we have adequate cover, and we have water as well. So before we get into kind of the nitty-gritty of each season type thing, I think it's important to kind of talk about the annual cycle of the birds. So I created this little graph, this little circle thing here. So for the sake of this talk, we're going to consider summer being June, July, and August. Fall will be September, October, November. winter, December, January, February, and spring, March, April, May. But in the sense of a bird cycle, those months really don't make that much sense. As you can kind of see, there's a lot of overlap between, what would be maybe fall for a bird considered to what the fall might be for the season. So essentially, there you got your breeding season here is mainly in the summertime. After kind of breeding season happens, most birds go through what's called a molt, and that's just the replacement of feathers. Once they molt, they migrate. Then you have a fall migration period where birds are moving from their breeding grounds to their wintering grounds, and that can be drawn out based on different populations of birds and where they are. So you get waves of migration throughout those fall months where you get certain species from one area that moves through, and then later in the fall you get different species. So you constantly have this turnover of birds moving through the island. Once fall migration is done and birds have settled in for the winter, they basically are spending the winter in whatever spot they chose. And that's going to be probably their longest period of time. They spend more of their time on their wintering grounds than they really do anywhere else. So, we think of some of these birds as our birds because they breed here. Well, they're really only here for maybe 3 or 4 months, and the rest of the time they're on their wintering grounds. So, really, a lot of these birds that we think are ours might be Argentina's birds or Brazil's birds because they spend more of their time down there than they do here. And then some species will actually molt again before the breeding season. So think of some of our warblers. They may molt into a breeding plumage during the winter, early spring. The males want to look pretty for the females. And then, so they'll do that in preparation for spring migration. And then spring migration occurs, which is a shorter time period generally. Birds are more, it's more pressing to get where they need to be. They don't have to take as much time like they do in the fall. They can kind of lazily migrate more in the fall, but in the spring there's an urgency to get to that breeding territory and claim those prime locations. Usually males go first, so they can kind of take that territory, and the females are usually a week or so behind. And then breeding, and then the whole cycle starts again. And obviously we have to kind of talk a little bit because not all birds migrate. Birds like cardinals, the cardinals you have in your backyard, they're always there. They don't migrate. Then you got species like the American redstart there on the right. That's a bird that we only see here on Kiawah during spring and fall migration. They don't breed here, they don't winter here, they're only passing through. And then you got species like great blue heron, where you may see these birds year-round, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the same birds here year-round. So you get migrant great blue herons that breed further north, and they come here, and they may spend the winter here. And then you got great blue herons that may breed here, and they may actually leave and go down further south. So you get this kind of shifting of individuals, even though the species may be present here year-round. And that's pretty common with a lot of the species that we see, where we might think they're here year-round, but they're actually different individuals. All right, we're going to jump in. I decided to start with winter because that's what we're in right now, and we actually feel like winter out there today. And I would suspect that if it was a really nice day, there wouldn't be so many people here today. But so kind of the way I set this up is I kind of highlighted a handful of things that are kind of unique to that season. I'm not going to get really into the weeds with all the different species. I wanted to keep it a little bit more general. But kind of things to expect in the wintertime is high numbers of shorebirds. So Kiawah is a really good place for shorebirds to come during the winter. And a lot of it has to do with food. There's just a lot of food for shorebirds to eat here during the wintertime. There's also less people on our beach, so they are not disturbed as much as well. This is the time of year where bald eagles and great horned owls are nesting. So if you know where some of the bald eagle nests are on Kiawah, you're likely you'll be able to see bald eagles, and I heard that the one in Ocean Park may already have a chick. So that's really good news. Kind of the other thing is the salt marsh. So if you ever look out into the salt marsh in the wintertime, it just looks kind of brown, dead of life. Maybe you'll see a great egret sitting out there. But what you don't know is there's thousands and thousands of sparrows out there that you can't see. And we're going to talk about that because we do research on those birds. So I'll get to those guys a little bit later. One of the other kind of unique things in the wintertime is you get these mixed species foraging flocks. Because food can be a little bit more scarce in the wintertime, species that normally wouldn't group up and be together kind of group up, and they move around the landscape looking for food. And if one can find some food somewhere, then everybody can benefit. So it's just a kind of a way to help birds survive the wintertime. I don't know if you've ever had any kind of drunken American robins smash into your windows, but this is a time where you start to see that. And that occurs because they drink or they eat the berries, the fermented berries, and they get a little drunk and kind of are not too good, and they sometimes kind of flop around. But I suspect that after this cold freeze, and this cold weather we've had, all those yopon berries are going to be nice and sweet now, and they're going to get gorged up really quick here by the robins and the waxwings. They probably will eat some berries. It seems to be robins, though. Seems to be the kind of the one that everybody kind of talks about. You know, robins acting, looking weird out and stuff. But okay, just gonna throw up some kind of the iconic birds of winter. I mentioned, you know, if you were to go out in the salt marsh. You got that's a salt marsh sparrow right there hiding in the spartina grass. On the beach, dunlin, that's a shorebird species. That's the one kind of just, let me find which one is the pointer here. Not that one. The green button. Well, I can't see green. I need to put my glasses on. I see it now. So the dunlin here, one of the most common shorebirds that we have. We could get upwards of 10 to 20,000 of those flocks on the east end during some periods of the wintertime. Also our piping plover, which is also another kind of iconic species here in the wintertime. It's an endangered species, or parts of their population is endangered, and there's a lot of research that goes on with those guys. If you move to the forest, you're going to find the ubiquitous yellow-rumped warbler. We'll talk a little bit about that because we do a little bit of work with them as well. Your yellow-bellied sapsucker, if you've ever seen trees that have this kind of weird lattice pattern, it's because of this guy right here. They make these little holes. The sap forms in those holes, but insects are then attracted to that sap. They eat the insects, they'll eat the sap. Other species then are attracted to those areas, and they also benefit from the sapsucker making those holes. And then if you go to almost any of our ponds, you're going to find probably some hooded mergansers on it as well. Okay, so this is one of the kind of activities that we do every winter here. It's called the Sea Islands Christmas Bird Count. It's it's an Audubon Society. This is the kind of what sponsors it. It's been going on for over 100 years. Not on Kiawah. I started it back in 2012, so we've only been doing it for, I don't know how many years that is, 12, 13, something like that. But essentially what this is it's a circle. And it includes Kiawah, Seabrook, all of Wadmalaw, most of Johns Island. We've got DeVoe Bank, a little bit of Bird Key. Actually, Bird Key is moving this way, so it doesn't show Bird Key now, but actually Bird Key has moved into our circle a little bit because it was so close. And one day a year, usually at the beginning of January, we get a bunch of volunteers to go out and count birds in this circle. And each kind of territory here with a number, I usually have 2 or 3 people go out and they just count all the birds that they see. And as you can see here, this last year we had like 69 participants. We counted 162 different species on that day among, in there. We also have people that just count birds at their bird feeders as well. So you may have seen a couple things go out asking people to count at your bird feeders. So those are all things that are helpful. One of the neat things that highlights kind of the importance of shorebirds in the winter for Kiawah is, so there's about every year in the United States, there's about 400 of these Christmas bird counts that go on. And in the years 2017, 2019, 2021, and 2025, the Sea Islands count had the highest count of semi-palmated plovers across the entire North America, across all the United States. So just kind of shows, again, how important Kiawah is to shorebirds, especially in the wintertime. And most of those, admittedly, occurred right there, down at the east end. All right, we're going to move to the sparrows a little bit here. So I kind of talked about all the sparrows that are out in the salt marsh when you don't really see them. Well, that's what these guys are. So we have 3 different species. We have the Nelson sparrow, the salt marsh sparrow, and the seaside sparrow. Most of the time, these guys, for the salt marsh and the seaside sparrow, they are obligate to the salt marsh. So their entire life cycle plays out in the salt marsh. So they breed in the salt marsh, and they spend the winter in the salt marsh. The Nelson sparrow is a little different, where it actually breeds across a wide range, and there's across Canada, so it can actually breed in freshwater marshes, brackish water, and salt water, but spends all of its winter time in salt marsh. So we've been doing this project since 2011, and essentially what we do is we go out during the biggest high tides of the month that are during the day, and we catch these birds at their high tide roost. So during low tide, when they're out feeding, they are just spread out across the marsh, which would be impossible to catch these birds. But at high tide, that covers their food, and they're forced to go somewhere, and they go to these little high areas out in the salt marsh. So this is Eagle Point Road, and there's Eagle Point here, you got marsh, and then you've got these little high spots out here. So that's where these birds go during high tide. And that's also when we can catch them. So because they're concentrated into a small area, what we'll do is we'll go out during high tide, we'll set up, these are nets that we set up. They're 40 big, fine, think of a volleyball net with kind of like a hair net to catch the birds instead of the big holes. So they're 40 feet long, 10 feet high. They have these pockets in them where the birds fly into and get stuck temporarily, and we get them out. But what we do is then we flush these birds by walking through the marsh vegetation and push them basically into this net. We sample about 15 to 18 different sites across the salt marsh of Kiawah. So, Eagle Point, we got places all up and down the marsh here. And it requires a lot of people to be successful, because you kind of are basically, it's like herding cats out there, trying to get these birds to kind of go where you want them, to funnel them down into where the nets are. And so this is kind of an illustration of how we do it. So we just kind of run them in, and then we get them out of the net there. And I'm not going to get too far into the weeds with like how many birds we banned and all that. That's the stuff is there. But for this project to date, that's kind of the numbers that we've had. When I say new birds, those are birds that we catch that we put a band on. And if you don't know what bird banding is, it's a little metal band that has a number on it, a unique number. We fix it to the leg of the bird. It doesn't hurt the bird. It just kind of sits on there like a bracelet. And it has a unique number. That way, if we catch that bird or somebody else catches that bird, we can get valuable information, such as movement, longevity, how long birds live, population estimates as well can be attained by putting a band on their legs, and a lot of that is because you have to recapture that bird. So as you can kind of see, we've put out a lot of new bands, but we also get a lot of recaptures, which is where that good data information comes from. If we were just to put out a bunch of bands and never recapture those birds, that wouldn't be as useful information. So we'd have to put that effort in to recapture those birds as well. I'll blow through this one just because, but outside of the banding part, we also, because of the banding, we have been able to collaborate with a lot of other researchers. They found out that we're doing this work, and they want to collaborate with us. So we've collaborated with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service back in 2016, putting special radio transmitters on salt marsh sparrows. We've deployed GPS tags on seaside sparrows, and we're going to be working with American Bird Conservancy this winter, putting a different kind of tracking device called a geolocator on salt marsh sparrows as well. And again, you probably don't know what geolocators are, but it's a tracking device. You have to recapture that bird again the following year to get that transmitter back to get the data. So that's where the kind of the tricky part comes in. But what we've learned over the years is these birds are super faithful to that little tiny patch of salt marsh that we catch them in. They come back to that same little spot year after year after year after year. So because of that, we're able to put these devices on these birds, and then we can get the data to kind of learn a little bit more and dive deeper into the lives of these birds. How big is the device is tiny, so it just sits on the back of the back, and they have these little loops that goes around their legs, so they wear it like a backpack essentially. And these tags weigh about 3% of the bird's body weight. And because of permitting things that we have to have, that's kind of the rule that any kind of tags that you put on a bird for research should be about 3% of the bird's body weight. So they're relatively small compared to the weight of the bird. Later, I think I've got some pictures of different tags. Okay, so we're going to move out of the salt marsh, and we're going to jump into the uplands here. So again, I mentioned that yellow rump warblers are kind of the ubiquitous bird here, songbird in the wintertime. They are everywhere, and one of the reasons is because of wax myrtles. You all familiar with what a wax myrtle shrub looks like? So that's the berry here. It's probably one of the most common understory plants that we have on the island. What kind of makes this relationship unique is yellow rump warblers are one of the very few species that can actually digest that waxy outer coating. No other species can do it, therefore they don't eat them because they're not going to get any nutrition out of it. But yellow rump warblers can. So that's why they're here, is because we have a lot of wax myrtles and there's a lot of food for them here. So it allows them to eat that, they get nutrition out of it, but then it also helps spread the seed around to other places and here so that more wax myrtles can grow as well. And because of this, the other kind of thing is most warblers don't winter this far north. They go way into they go to the Caribbean, they go to Central America, South America to spend the winter. But because they can eat this food source that we have here, yellow rump warblers are one of the warbler species that winters the furthest north in North America. All right, so we've been doing songbird banding monitoring since 2010, and we do this from December to March, and we do it about every 10 days. And we really are kind of, even though we're catching all winter songbirds, what we catch mostly is yellow rump warblers. It's like 90% of what we catch when we're out there. So it allows us to now we've turned this almost into a yellow rump warbler study, but we're also getting winter survival information on other species as well. And so we do this at Captain Sam's. We have 2 different sites at Captain Sam's. We have kind of the one spot that we've been doing it for forever. And then last year we found a different spot which is more in the dunes. So now we are kind of doing 2 different sites to kind of compare those, that row. If you're on the beach and you kind of look up the dunes and you see that one little line of narrow wax myrtle shrubs, and then it gets kind of the taller trees, well, we're targeting those narrow band of wax myrtles there. And seeing how that may be different than kind of back deeper into the woods where there's more diversity of plants. All right, that's winter. Let's warm up a little bit. We're gonna kind of now move into the springtime. So spring here is so it's a time of rebirth and renewal. So things start to green up. The soundscape here intensifies. It's not just blowers and mowers; it's the birds singing. So it's gets louder here, and all the birds start to get more active. They're hunting for territories. They're setting up breeding territories. They're doing courtship. This is the time where our breeding birds arrive. So the birds that are migrate to here to breed, they usually get here early. They're here usually by March or early April to kind of start that process of courting and things. This is also the time for shorebird migration, and I'm going to go into a little bit of red knots here in a minute, but what makes kind of Kiawah super important and special is the red knots here during the springtime. Now, while shorebird migration is occurring, so a lot of shorebirds breed really far north, spring is when the shorebirds that breed that nest on Kiawah start to set up their territories as well. So Wilson's plovers and least terns and American oyster catchers, they begin to kind of defend their territories or their nests and things like that they have on the ground. And also the couple wading bird rookeries that we have on the island are also underway, which we have kind of there at the beach club. There's that little pond by the parking lot. That's a spot where herons and egrets nest, and then there's another spot on the river course. There may be others I don't know about, so if you know of one, please let me know. So there's a lot of lots of happening in springtime, and a lot of it has to do with kind of the breeding season, pre-breeding season, if you will. Some of the iconic birds of spring, the painted buntings. That's when they arrive, usually about April. Up in the top left corner there is a yellow-throated warbler. That's one of our breeding species of warblers here. If you learn its song, you'll be able to find it almost across the island. Ospreys are super loud. You'll start hearing them chirping. They're hunting for nests at that period of time. And again, wood storks, good time to see wood storks here as well, although they don't nest here. And then the red knots. So I think we'll move into red knots here now. So as many of you probably know by now, you've heard a lot about red knots, but red knots come here in the springtime. Usually they start to arrive in February, late February, and their numbers build and build and build across the spring, and by May, there could be thousands of them here. And this is one of the major stopover spots along their migration from their wintering grounds, which could be as far south as the southern tip of Argentina, all the way, and they breed up into the Arctic. So while they're here, what are they doing here and why? So two reasons. They're here to fatten up. They have to rest because it's a long migration. So they're here to eat a lot of food, and they're also here to replace their feathers. So they molt here as well. So when they get here, they usually look like this. By the time they leave, they look like that. And I don't know if you can this is obviously not the same bird, but it's a good illustration. See just look how plump and fat that thing is compared to there. It just kind of shows you how much they can actually put on. They can literally double their body weight in the couple of months that they might be here. And what are they eating here? Well, mainly they're eating coquinus clam shells. They will go eat horseshoe crabs as well when there's a horseshoe crab spawn. Somehow they know it and they leave and they'll go eat horseshoe crabs wherever that might be, and then they'll come back and go back to eating coquinus clam shells or coquina clams. So how do they get here? So this is kind of one of the marvels of red knots. They have one of the largest migrations of any of the birds. So they can travel up to 9,000 miles from their wintering ground at the tip of South America all the way to their Arctic breeding grounds. And they do this in a relatively short period of time. Obviously, they have a couple of stopover periods during that time, but they don't like just kind of gradually work their way up like this. they make these big, long migrations between stopover periods. So birds that spend the winter down here will fly nonstop to a staging area here in northern Brazil. These birds then will do the same thing in Brazil. They'll fatten up, and these guys will then fly nonstop over the ocean for several days until they reach the east coast. So they're doing this day and night, flying, constantly flapping for days on end, and that's why they have to put on all that weight, because they're making these huge flights over open ocean. There's nowhere to stop in the ocean, so they just have to keep plugging through. It can vary depending on weather. They may run into different weather and things and wind and stuff. So it could be anywhere from probably 5 to 7 days or so. Yeah. And then once they get to the East Coast here, Kiawah is one of their destinations. Florida is also another hot spot. And then Delaware Bay is also kind of another one of their historical hot spots where they kind of stage. Delaware Bay was known for their horseshoe crab spawning, and they thought that almost all red knots went to Delaware Bay because of the horseshoe crab spawning. And they would time their migration for when horseshoe crabs spawn, and then they would just gorge on their eggs so that they could put on enough fat from here to then make it to the Arctic. But what we've learned here is that a lot of these birds are now staying at Kiawah and Seabrook area here. They're able to put on enough weight here on coquina clams that they don't need to go to Delaware Bay, and they can make it from here and get to the Arctic from here. So there's been a lot of cool research that DNR has been doing to kind of help kind of parse that out, if you will. And I got a couple slides on some of that research that they've done. All right, I've kind of already talked about that. I didn't talk about that, but I will later. But if you see a flock of red knots when you're out there, kind of remember why they're here. It might be fun to kind of run through them and see a big flock of birds fly around, but those guys are here. They need to rest. Every time they're flushed and have to fly, that's energy that they're wasting. And then they'd have to go back to feeding and doing that. So we try not to let them kind of rest and feed without any disturbance.
Aaron,
How do they navigate? Birds have lots of different strategies when they're navigating. They use the Earth's magnetic field to help direct them in directions. They also use cues such as physiological like barriers. So some birds will use ocean coastlines when they migrate. They'll use that. Some birds will also use mountain ranges. They also use the stars. If it's a clear night, they'll use stars to navigate as well. And we know this because of experiments that was done a long time ago, where they'll put songbirds in a cage and they'll put a picture of the night sky up, and they'll put ink on their feet, and they'll see where the birds are directing they're going to based on that. And if they shift that pattern, the birds then shift also the way where their thing is. So we know that birds use these different environmental cues, and if one of those, let's say like a cloudy night and they can't see the sky, then they're able to rely on one of those other means as well. All right, this is also some of the similar information, but the main point of this is there was a study done that was published in 2022. It was done here on Kiawah and Seabrook, and this was through, I think, University of South Carolina, also DNR, but they had researchers that came out and basically did red knot counts and surveys, and they found that 17,000 red knots passed through Kiawah Island during the springtime, and that was about 27% of the entire population. So that shows you how important Kiawah and Seabrook area, these beaches are to this species. And when they're here on an average of 47 days. And we know that because of birds that are marked with bands on their legs. So like this guy here has this flag here. So they also kind of are able to, that's how they kind of know how long an individual would stay here. And we get all those wintering populations here as well. So the birds that winter that winter at the tip of South America, the birds that winter maybe in Brazil, the birds that winter in Florida, they all also come to Kiawah to stage together. So we get all those different populations. And then just kind of show you a little bit of some more research that DNR has done on red knots. The last few years, they put on different types of transmitters on their, I can say they wear in the same way on their back. And this is kind of where they learned a little bit of how these birds actually get to the Arctic from here. So this is 3 different birds, and this is kind of their travel up to the breeding grounds from Kiawah here, because they catch most of the time when they catch birds, it's on the Kiawah side, because that's where all these birds are roosting at. So just kind of helps illustrate that point I made about, a lot of these birds don't need Delaware Bay. They kind of just go to the Arctic from here. All right, that was spring. What time is it? Halfway there. Oh, man. I'm sorry. I don't see anybody doing this, so I guess you're all right. So summer is a time where it's hot here. There's a lot less bird activity going on. There's a lot fewer species here, but what the birds are doing is super important. They're basically raising the next generation. So there's, like I said, bird daycares. So this is a time where birds are either incubating eggs. Most likely they're trying to fledge young. This is the time of season where you're going to see those little awkward, fluffy fledglings bouncing around in the backyard. You'll see the adults feeding a begging chick, where they just kind of sit there and fling their wings. Summer is also the time where the birds do their molt as well. And this is also, so they don't molt all their feathers at once. So that's why you don't see naked birds out there. They do this in a pattern, so where they can actually, still kind of thermoregulate and be able to fly. But because they are molting some feathers, they might be a little bit more susceptible to predation. So they become a little bit more skulky, if you will. I don't know if that's a general term or not, but it's a term we use in bird world. Basically just means they get a little bit more secretive. This is also the time where I get a lot of calls, or people ask me, where are all the birds at? They don't come into my bird feeder anymore. And my answer is always, well, they shift their diet a lot in the summertime to a more protein-based diet. So they're eating more insects. They need to feed, the females need to make eggs. They need to help. They also need to molt their feathers. So those fatty seeds that are in your feeders are really good in the wintertime, but they're less important in the summertime because the birds need more protein and different things that insects provide. So the birds aren't gone. They're still there. They're just eating other things. All right, I can cruise on. Some of our iconic birds of the summer here, the brown pelicans. Everybody's familiar with the pelicans kind of gliding over the top of the breakers. American oyster catchers, laughing gulls are pretty much all over the beach, all over. Almost every pond probably has a green heron nest around it. Clapper rails are more visible, or can be more visible, at least in the summertime. If you've ever seen a clapper rail with its little chicks following behind it, its chicks look like little black fluff balls on stilts. Sometimes you'll see them more time in the open. And then Chuck Will's widows. Have you ever heard the annoying bird at night in your yard? Okay, that's the Chuck Will's widow, which is actually a really cool bird that it's a nocturnal species that feeds on flying insects. All right, this is the time where our beach nesting birds can really have some challenges. So the birds that are nesting on the beach are there because they have to be, but this is also the time where people want to be on the beach as well. So while these guys are trying to raise their young and incubate eggs, there are also a lot of people on the beach that can disturb them. This is kind of where we kind of come and do a little bit of management action to try to help these birds a little bit to try to keep them from getting disturbed. So if you're on the beach in the summertime, you see a lot of our yellow signs up. We've actually started putting rope up down at Captain Sam's the last couple of years, which I think has helped a lot more. So those are areas that we just want to try to keep people out of because these birds need a pretty wide berth. They get disturbed pretty easily. So, and when they do, you know, they run off of their nest because they think their nest is pretty hidden, and it is. Like, it's just eggs on the sand. The eggs are speckled. It looks just like the ground. So when they see somebody, they think you're a predator or whatever, they run off. But then those eggs now are exposed to that heat of the summer. And if they're off of that nest for too long, those eggs can overheat, and then those eggs won't hatch. Same with chicks. You know, those if it's a newly hatched chick, they can get overheated as well. So, you know, a lot of times in the summertime, you see that Wilson's plover doing right now. It's instead of birds sitting on the eggs to keep them warm, a lot of times these guys will sit on the eggs to keep them cool. They'll run down to the water, they'll soak their bellies in the water, and then they'll run back up and kind of help cool those eggs and shade them from the sun. And also, I'll mention the shorebird stewardship program here too. So, you know, we also, because, you know, we go out and we put signs up to try people out, but we also created the shorebird stewardship program many years ago, which has become hugely successful. And I think the birds have greatly benefited from what we are doing out there. It's a volunteer program. We've got some information in the back. And it's essentially, it's an education program. So it's really just teaching the public and the beachgoers about the birds that are on the island, why we want to protect them, what to kind of look for, warning signs, you know, when you get too close to a bird, things like that. So it's just and I think it's gone over really well. We've got, how many people we have now, Cindy? 40. So we've got 40 volunteers, and we can use a lot more. So if people are interested, please see Cindy in the back. All right, I'm going to kind of fly through this one real quick, but we do research also on a shorebird. This is the Wilson's plover. We've been catching these guys since 2015, and this is a little different. We ban them, but we put this what we call a flag on their leg, and it has 3 unique digits on it. Because these guys are much harder to catch after you caught them once. They're smart. They're harder to catch after you caught them one time. So this way, we don't have to catch this bird again. We can just look at it through binoculars or a spotting scope, and we can identify who that bird is from afar. So to date, you know, we've put about 55 flags on Wilson's plovers here. We have kind of a dedicated recite where Michael and myself will go out every once in a while and do a concerted effort to recite these birds. The more we get recites of these birds, the better we can learn how these birds move around the island, how long they live, and things like that. And one of the really cool things, which was really unexpected, was this bird right here. I don't know, you probably don't recognize this mud, but that's actually a mud flat in Venezuela. And that's a bird that I flagged here on Kiawah during the breeding season. So we were able to connect dots with this species, with this bird, where it breeds on Kiawah and spends the winter down in Venezuela. And that's only one of 2 individuals that have been recited in Venezuela. So kind of cool thing. And to kind of learn a little bit more about this species is we're going to try to test a new kind of tracking device this summer. We're going to try to put a GPS tag, and this will give us accurate data. Exactly, we'll know kind of where that bird is, and we'll be able to see how it moves around the island. With our dynamic beach that we have and how breeding habitat moves around so much, and we lose a lot and then we'll gain some another year. We'll be able to kind of learn a little bit how these birds actually kind of coexist with the changing beach all the time. And they're solar powered, so in theory, they should last a long time as well. All right, so now we're going to go back into the forest. So I started up these breeding bird surveys back in 2009. This is probably, this is a huge data set. I've created 238 points across the island. I do these at the end of May and into early June. Essentially what I do is I go to every one of these points. I sit there for 5 minutes. I record every bird I hear or see. I also record the distance to that bird, which allows us, it's called distance sampling, but then that allows us, because we know the distance to each bird, it allows us to kind of get a density estimate of those birds. I've broken it up into 9 different routes because I could only do a certain amount of points in a morning. So it takes me 9 days to cover all these. Most of these detections that I get are all done by ear. So most of this is just by the birds' songs or calls rather than seeing the birds. And then this data is all kind of entered into a spreadsheet. To date, I've gotten 62,000 plus birds over the years, 133 different species. But what the meat and the potatoes of this is so this is kind of the really good stuff that comes out of this kind of research. So this is just 6 different species. I just kind of cherry picked a few just to kind of show different. So this is the painted bunting. So what this is showing basically is painted buntings are actually increasing at a rate of 4.5% each year since I've been doing these surveys. So that's good news, right? Painted bunting is good, yay. They're going up. Now, what we also find for other species, the orchard oriole has declined almost 9% during that same period. Cardinals, kind of everywhere, they're pretty much stable. Brown thrashers, everybody familiar with the brown thrasher? Their populations are decreasing a good bit. Downy woodpeckers, they're doing good. You're like, yay, maybe there's lots of snags because they're cavity nesters. But then Carolina chickadee numbers are actually decreasing. They're also a cavity nester. So maybe it's not cavities that are the issue. So I've got charts like this for 20 plus different species, which I'm not going to pull up and talk about each one. Just wanted to kind of show some examples of the data. So we can kind of even pull this in even closer, just look at painted buntings. So what we've done here is, on top of just doing the count, I've looked at every one of those 238 points, and I've looked on aerial photography for every year, and I've made an estimate of disturbance, basically development. So I broke that into 3 categories: no development in that circle. It's a 250-meter circle, basically. Low development, so if less than half of that circle has houses in it, then it's low, and if more than half, it's high. So we can look at that across for painted buntings, and we can see that where there's no development, our density of painted buntings is 0.2 painted buntings per acre. Okay, that's pretty good. We have about 755 acres of no development areas within my points. So that kind of equals 615 painted buntings. So if we move over to low development, we see that it's lower, which you'd expect, right? 0.7 painted buntings per acre in kind of low developed areas. And then it's a pretty good drop off into the higher developed areas. So obviously development does drive painted bunting density. But there's still a good number of painted buntings there, but there's just a lot more acres of that. So on average, we have about 2,300 painted buntings on Kiawah Island every summer or so, based on that research. Another cool thing that we learned is the colonization of white-breasted nuthatches on the island. So if you're familiar with what this species is, from 2009 to 2019, we had no detections of white-breasted nuthatches on Kiawah Island doing these breeding bird counts. On 2020, I had 2 at the western end of the island. On 2021, I also had 2, but they were further down the island. On 2022, we had 6. 2023, 7. 2024, 20. And then last year, we had it in 29 different points. So Obviously, this bird has moved on to Kiawah and then has now colonized Kiawah, if you will. So kind of trying to think of reasons why. Well, I can't say for sure. My guess is based on habitat preference of the white-breasted nuthatch is they like more open kind of woodland habitat with less dense understory. So potentially as Johns Island has gotten more developed, that's actually been maybe more intriguing for white-breasted nuthatches. And then as they've moved down Johns Island, they've jumped over onto Kiawah, and they've found Kiawah, and now they're kind of moving from west out to east. And I suspect when I do my counts this summer, we'll probably have white-breasted nuthatches out in Ocean Park. All right, I'm going to kind of skip a little bit, or I'll go through this a little quickly because we still have fall to do. But I do the painted bunting banding as well in the summertime. We go to people's houses, we catch painted buntings, we put bands on their legs. We have about 10 or 15 sites or so that we go to. We have a specialized cage that we catch them. We just take the bird feeder down that they're used to going to, and we put this cage up with a bird feeder inside. And we catch a lot of painted buntings that way. I'll kind of skip this one for the sake of time, but we also have partnered with a lot of different researchers doing different types of research with painted buntings, putting different tracking devices on them as well. All right, we're going to move to fall. So fall is kind of if you want to see birds on Kiawah, fall is the time to do it. This is when we get the most diversity of birds. We have what we call migration fallouts here. We'll have a good raptor migration where you can see streams of raptors just kind of gliding across the sky, where they call them riding thermals. So the way hawks migrate is they don't use powered flight so much like songbirds, but what they'll do is they'll catch a heated thermal, they'll ride it up and circle, they'll go really, really high in the sky, and then they'll take off, and then they just glide as long as they can until they catch another thermal, and they'll do it again. And you'll see this over and over again. If you look up in the sky, if you see these kettles of things spinning, that's what those birds are doing. They're migrating, they're catching that thermal and going up. Also swallownadoes, which I kind of could term, that's what that video was. If you've ever been down at the Captain Sam's in the fall and you've seen that huge flock of little birds just kind of flying over the dunes, those are tree swallows. And they're here to eat wax myrtle berries. They're one of the other species that can actually digest that too. Fall is also the time when we get our vagrant birds, birds that aren't supposed to be here, birds from the west. They get lost and during migration, and wind pushes them to the east coast and they show up here. We've had lots of different birds that we've caught in our mist nets during fall migration that shouldn't be here. Species that are supposed to be on the west coast. So that's kind of the time to find those rare species as well. Is it a problem for the bird? No. It depends. So a lot of birds, it depends on how they got here. If it's a weather event, like they're able to reorient themselves and make it back to where they're going. If it's some birds have potentially what we think when they get our vagrants or get lost is they might just have their internal map might just be off a bit. So if what a normal bird would say to go south, their internal clock is telling them to go this way, and they end up here. So those birds may actually not find their way, to where they want to be. So it's hard to tell. There hasn't been a lot of research done on vagrant birds and what happens after they kind of find them in a place that they're not supposed to be. Iconic birds of the fall, real quick. Catbirds and common yellowthroats are going to be the top two songbirds that you're going to find in the fall. They migrate through here in the thousands and thousands. Those are the birds we catch the most in our nets. If you go to the beach, you're going to see tons of terns and gulls all staged up. This is the time of year where that roost on Sea Marsh Drive really gets going, and there's lots of birds that hang out there. And this is also when our roseate spoonbills are a little bit more visible. Kind of that post-breeding dispersal period where birds from Florida and other breeding populations kind of move around a little bit. All right, I'll skip this one, but it's just kind of a cool graphic that shows kind of how birds migrate. Um, the bottom left here is just a radar image of one night, and you can see because there's so many birds that migrate at night, most of these songbirds migrate at night, they can get picked up on a weather radar. So all those balloons, those are all birds that are in the sky that radar is picking up, and they're migrating south. So real quick, I'll just kind of breeze through the fall migration banding project, but this is one of our most intensive projects that we do. We do this from August 15th through November 30th. We have two different sites that we band at, one at Captain Sam's and one at Little Bear. That's at the east end of the island. And we do this every day. So the only time we don't do it is weather, so if it's raining. But any other day, we are out there doing birds, banding these birds. We do this, we kind of go into the scrub shrub, high marsh dunes, and maritime thicket habitat. And because this is such an intensive effort, we hire 4 to 6 seasonal technicians each fall to kind of help us with that. And kind of something I'm kind of proud of, I guess, is since 2012, when we started hiring seasonal technicians, we've had 56 different individuals come through here and train with us and learn what we're doing. Many of those have gone on to get graduate degrees. We have PhDs. They've gone out, and just done good things in the conservation world. So this is something that I kind of feel good about because of all the different people that have come through here and that have kind of trained under and learned from us. So as you can see, we catch a lot of birds in the fall. We've banded over almost 105,000 birds just in the fall season. This is kind of the location of our stations, and I'll kind of skip this one as well. Just kind of shows the difference between Captain Sam's and Little Bear numbers. So why does long-term research matter? So for one, it can separate normal variation from real change. So in any time you're dealing with birds or anything, that there's always variation from year to year. Weather, lots of things can change that. But when you do it over a long period of time, like we've been doing it, then you can actually start to tease out what's actually happening. So, and you can start actually getting some meaningful information about population trends and things like that. It can also help reveal climate change impacts because the climate change impacts happen such a small increments. So you need really long-term data sets in order to kind of actually learn a little bit of what's actually going on. It can also show cause and effect. That's just not a coincidence. Kind of goes back to that first point. It can help inform policy and management decisions, preserves knowledge across generations, which I think is important. A lot of times, some of these projects are done for like short periods of time, and then that's it. But we're lucky enough to have biologists that have been here a long time to kind of carry on these projects over a long period of time. For banding data, we can look at timing shifts of migration over time, abundance changes, and then this leads into the new technology a little bit as well. So, we can kind of start to couple this long-term data research with this new technology to kind of help us hone in on some of those things that maybe just banding birds doesn't get at. So some of the roles that you guys can play to kind of help with birds on the island. First one, and this is something I'm super passionate about, is to encourage native plants. I've done this in my yard on James Island. My whole front yard, I ripped up all my sod this summer, and I have no sod on my front yard, and it's all now planted with plants. My backyard is in the progress, but I do have a 12-year-old who still likes to play baseball, so I kept some grass for him. But my yard is being converted over completely, and the other, and encourage everybody to do the same. A non-native plant can provide some cover for birds, but what it doesn't provide a lot of times is any food source. So native plants have evolved with insects and bugs that feed on them, and that's the basis of the food chain for birds, is those bugs that feed on them. So a lot of times those non-native plants are kind of wastelands for insects, and there's just no food, doesn't provide any kind of value for wildlife. The other thing, you're probably all familiar with the SGAs and the bobcats and the rat poison. So it doesn't just affect bobcats, it also affects the birds. So our hawks and our owls are eating those same poisoned rats and mice, and probably eating a lot more than bobcats do, because there's just a lot more hawks and owls out there than bobcats. So, and we don't have collars on all the hawks and the owls, so when they do go off and die, we don't know, unlike the bobcats. So it's kind of, we don't know how they're affecting our raptor population here. I mentioned the don't disturb the shorebirds on the beach. Be aware of windows. So this is a big one. Millions and millions of birds are killed each year by window strikes. We have a lot of big windows on Kiawah. So if you notice, there's a certain window or something on your house that you're getting kind of constant bird strikes, there are things that you can do to put on that window to kind of help alleviate some of that problem. There's stickers and window treatments and things online. If you are having that issue, please contact me and I can kind of help you kind of find maybe a solution or something like that. And be an advocate for birds. You can do that in a variety of ways. The Shorebird Stewardship Program, doing other kind of conservation efforts and things like that. So why does this all matter? Why are we even doing this? Birds are great indicators of ecosystem health. They're easy to study. They're everywhere. They're easily observed. They are relatively abundant. They respond quickly to environmental change. So, if you were to go clear something or change something, the birds that are in that area can tell you something, because they just won't be present, or new species might move in. For instance, like the example of the white-breasted nuthatch, right? Something changed to allow that to happen. They also connect ecosystems, right? So, like I mentioned so much today so far, about birds migrating. The Kiawah is connected. Birds that are here on Kiawah are connected to the Arctic. They're connected to South America. They're connecting all these different places across the globe. They occupy all the parts of the food web too. They eat everything. They're eating things are eating them. So they're so interconnected to almost everything. And they matter to people, right? People like to watch birds. They spend a lot of money traveling around looking at birds. They spend money to put bird food out. So people like birds. And when people like things, they tend to care a little bit more. All right, last slide. That's not too bad. So kind of the key takeaways that I kind of want to just kind of go over here. I mentioned this already. Birds play an important role in ecosystem services for our island. They reduce pests, not only insect pests, but rats and mice and things like that. They're important in seed dispersal. So a lot of birds eat seeds and spread them around, which allow more plants to grow. They help nutrient cycling, so between habitats. So let's say a bird goes out and eats a bunch of fish out in the ocean, and it comes back and it sits on the beach and decides to let those, after it recycles those, it goes and then onto the beach. Well, those nutrients now are on the beach and being used by those benthic invertebrates in the sand that other birds will be eating and things like that. So it's just a continuous cycle of nutrients moving across these systems. I mentioned they're indicator species for ecosystem health, and the cultural and economic, I kind of talked about that last one. Kind of the other thing is species diversity ebbs and flows with environmental change. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it can be bad. Just if something happens in one part of the island that may negatively affect one species, that may actually benefit another species. Is that good or bad? It depends on your perspective and how important maybe that one species' role is. But it's just something to kind of keep in mind that change is always happening, and those birds are going to respond to that change. I already kind of talked about this as well, that Kiawah's role in a bigger network. Birds are detected across states and countries. Kiawah is a critical stop, not just a destination for a lot of these birds. Research can help guide protection and conservation. I hope that what we do here on Kiawah, Jim and I and Michael, is actually important and people care, and it's actually doing something as a benefit for the island as well. And then lastly, it takes a village. It takes everybody to kind of help push this and kind of make sure that that these birds are important, and we keep them here for future generations.
One big takeaway, I want to thank Aaron. I think I learned a lot, but one big takeaway for me is I will never call someone a bird brain again because, these birds are pretty smart. I think they know what they're doing. So, but Aaron, thank you. And I know you probably have questions, but I really do not think we could entertain them today. We said we'd be out of here around 4. So if you have questions, just read all the literature back there. Go to shorebird meetings. February 18th program. What time is that? Cindy?
Really easy and really fun, and you don't have to commit to a whole lot of time. So I do recommend you call.
Yeah, it's really a great opportunity. And also go on Pam Cohen's website. She has several inspiring, just makes me want to cry every time I see her videos. They're so inspiring. You should go and watch her videos on her website. So thanks to everyone who came. It does take a village. These birds are smart, but they need our help. Thank you.
See you again. Still here, but you're